Hi there, it's Dr. Kevin. We are going to talk about Chapter 3 tonight. So um, I will begin with discussion of the first PowerPoint 3A, and then we'll move over to to the PowerPoint 3B. Both are pretty short, so this shouldn't take very long. We'll just make a quick discussion of it. So I'll begin with that first PowerPoint. We'll start sharing that. 3A. And it looks like this. This chapter is about collaboration between all the different players that we have involved with students with disabilities. And the beginning of this chapter starts with a profile of a student named John. And you see his picture there on the first page of the chapter. And John is a student who has an identified intellectual disability. He's 8 years old, he's in the second grade, and you have a description there of John and some of the things that are going on with him. It talks about his reading ability, how he can recognize the alphabet and some of his sight words. Talks about his reading not really being fluent yet, and he's having difficulty remembering important parts of the passages that he reads. Some of the things that might be typical of a student with what I would consider a very mild intellectual disability. It says that his IQ is recorded at a 65, which is really at the pretty high end of the range of intellectual disability. His mathematics achievement is below average. When a child has an intellectual disability, we would expect all of their academics to be in the below average range. Because intellectually their functioning is at that low level, and so we would expect all of their academics to function there as well. So then we get into a discussion of the different people who are going to be part of that team and who are around the table to discuss John's progress. And we've got his parents there. It begins talking at the bottom of the second column about the people who are involved. We've got his parents, we've got the general education teacher, a special education teacher, a speech and language pathologist, a school psychologist, the principal, and those are the people who are the essentials. And it does involve a few other people as we go along. It talks there as we get on to the second page. It talks about how his parents are cooperative with the process. But they're still in a little bit of shock over the whole thing. They would like for his teachers and the speech language pathologist to help them better understand what's going on with his education. So I want you to think for a few minutes, who else might be involved in John's education besides the people who are listed here. Other people that might come into contact with John during his educational day. We've got his general education teacher, the special education teacher, the speech language pathologist, the psychologist who did the evaluation to determine that intellectual disability, and then we've got the principal of the school. Who else might come into contact with John? Well, of course, we've got his parents as well. But what about the bus driver? Now, the bus driver is not going to be a part of this meeting. The bus driver isn't going to be a decision maker, but the bus driver has some very important contact with John every day. And so we would want to make sure that whatever decisions are made about John, maybe any important procedures about giving John instructions, making sure he follows directions, maybe he needs instructions given to him more than once or very clearly, things like that need to be conveyed to the bus driver as well as the teacher. What about the teachers that interact with John who aren't at the table? Maybe the PE teacher or the music teacher. Maybe the paraprofessionals that coordinate the happenings in the lunchroom every day. Those people are going to have important interactions with John. And so it's important that all of those people are informed about how they can interact with John as well. So collaboration is where all of that comes together. Collaboration is where we bring all the people who work with John to the table, not only for decision making, but then those people go out and spread the news to the other people who interact with John, who have important roles in his daily work in the school setting, and help him get through his day. So the next question here on your PowerPoint is, what could possibly go wrong? So think about that for just a minute. What could go wrong in the school setting, in the collaboration process? And it doesn't take very long to come up with some conclusions there. If you've worked with people in any setting, even in the university setting, suppose you're in a class with other students and you're given a group project. What can go wrong with that? You probably all know, you've probably all experienced what can go wrong with that. And what can go wrong with that is maybe there's a misunderstanding about the project. And one person thinks they heard the professor say one thing, and someone else is quite sure that they heard something else. And so you've got different interpretations about what the message was. Another thing that can go wrong is that people don't carry their weight. So when the jobs are given out as to who's going to do what for the particular task at hand, people don't carry their weight. That happens a lot with group projects, but that can happen in the school setting as well. And so the general ed teacher thinks that the special ed teacher is supposed to do one thing, and perhaps the special ed teacher thinks the general ed teacher should do more of that. Maybe the PE teacher says, that's not my job. That should be the special ed teacher's job to teach that skill to this student. He's a special ed student, not a general ed student. I shouldn't be responsible for that part of his education. Maybe the music teacher says, John shouldn't even be in my classroom. And so this is where things can really go wrong with collaboration. We have to think then about, how does it really work? It looks great on paper, but what happens when we get real people working together on real problems? And it can get kind of sticky sometimes. So this chapter talks about the things that we've got to do to make it really work to the benefit of students, because they're the ones who are going to be impacted by what we do in collaboration in the real world. So the next slide talks about some keys to successful collaboration. And we've got a whole list here. Your book goes into some detail about each one of these: volunteering, sharing resources, responsibility, sharing decision-making, and then achieving common goals. If we don't have those things lined up really well, then we have a lot of room for error and hurt feelings, and people getting upset and mad about things. Lots of that. So read that in your book. Community building. We can get a long way down the line if we've got an administrator that can help us with that, and if the teachers are working together. The word parity is defined in your book as people having some equality in responsibility along the way, and that helps a great deal too. Sometimes we find that in special education settings, we'll have a paraprofessional, that is a teacher's aide or assistant, who sometimes has as much or more responsibility for a student with a special education need than the teacher, him or herself. And sometimes that person feels put upon or used when they find themselves being the primary educator in the situation rather than the teacher of record. Sometimes they spend a lot of time sitting at the back of the room with that child with a disability and build a very strong relationship and are, again, the primary educator of that child. So we've got to make sure that that person feels valued in the process, not just a glorified babysitter, but feels a great deal of value in the work that they're doing, and they're given a voice in the situation. But we can't let it go too far the other way. Sometimes that person is given too much of a voice when, in fact, perhaps they're not the person with the training in disabilities. So we've got to make sure that we've got some balance there, and that we share the work, that we use our expertise in the ways in which we're trained, and that we let our planning reflect the training that we do have, and we use it wisely. There's a list of barriers to collaboration, and this is listed as a question on your first test. And there are 4 types, and you'll be asked on your test to describe them. They are conceptual, pragmatic, attitudinal, and professional. So I want you to spend a little bit of time reviewing those in your textbook and seeing what the differences are. That's the end of part 1 of chapter 3. So now let's switch over to part 2, or B, of chapter 3. We want to have not only collaboration within the school, amongst the school personnel, but we also want to have collaboration between school and families. That's critical to having a successful plan for a student. And so this portion of the chapter talks about that. How can we make things happen and happen well between schools and families? One way that we can do that is increase student involvement. And we increase student involvement by making sure that our plans are very individualized and very centered on the person. There's a trend in schools today that we call person-centered planning. If we're not careful, we fall into a habit of generalizing our IEPs so that everybody that's in a particular teacher's class, or everybody in a certain grade level, or everybody with a similar disability ends up getting a plan that looks a whole lot like everybody else's. And that is not the way it's intended to be done. And so we want to make sure that that doesn't happen in our special education process. We want to make sure that the plan for John is unique to John, and it doesn't look like anybody else's plan. It's exactly what John needs, because John's reading needs and math needs and social needs and behavioral needs and health needs are going to be very unique to him, different from exactly those of anybody else. Now, his reading needs may be like somebody else's reading needs, but they're not going to match exactly to somebody else's math needs and social needs, et cetera, et cetera. So we want to make sure that we're very person-centered, very centered on John when we start our plan. We want to involve all the right people. We want to make sure John's parents are involved. We want to make sure that the speech pathologist who's involved with John is there. If John has any other related service needs, those people are all involved. And the plan is very much unique to John, or whoever the plan happens to be about. If the student involved is old enough and able enough, we want to make sure that they're involved in the process. And if they're able, we want to allow them to perhaps, as they get a little bit older, to even lead the meeting. This is another trend in IEP meetings, to give the students some ownership over the process and help them actualize some of their goals for themselves. There's also a trend in schools today to let students put together, or sometimes with the help of their parents or their teachers, put together a portfolio that describes themselves, kind of like a personal scrapbook that goes into some detail about who they are and how they got to where they are educationally, so that each student can bring to the table and share with their teachers, and sometimes even their friends, a little snapshot of who they are and what their needs are in the school setting. Certainly not a mandatory thing, but some schools are allowing and even encouraging that approach to getting to know students on a more user-friendly level, less hard paperwork and more photos and essays, and a little bit more casual approach to getting to know a student. We want to increase family involvement by creating a very pleasant environment in which to do this collaboration. We want to use language that's not alienating to families, not a lot of acronyms, not a lot of schoolese that we tend to fall into when we get into school settings. We use a lot of abbreviations, we use a lot of school-related language that sometimes people who aren't in the education field feel alienated by. So we want to keep that to a minimum or not use it at all. Or if we do use it, we want to make sure that we inform parents as to what the language means that we're using. We also want to make sure that we honor parents' time, and we also honor their input. So when we say a meeting is going to start at a particular time, we want to start then, and we want to end when we say it's going to end. But we also want to value their input. So if they have something they want to say, we want to make sure that we give them an opportunity to say it and not cut them off, not make them feel as though there's not time to give their input. We don't want them to feel as though the decisions have all been made before they ever get there. That's another pitfall that we sometimes make with when working with parents. We give them the impression that all the decisions have already been made and this is just a formality. And that certainly isn't the case. The legal mandate is that we involve parents in the process of decision making. And so we can't make decisions without parents' involvement. We also want to make sure that we give them a copy of all the necessary paperwork and help explain it to them so that they're not just blindly walking through the process. We want them to have an informed view of what's going on from start to finish. What you see on the next slide, and what's covered very articulately in your book, is a list of the different collaboration styles. And there's also a test or question or two on this topic. So you want to spend some time with this in your book. It's a description of the different types of collaboration. We've all heard of co-teaching, but what does that really look like in a classroom setting? We've got a one teach, one observe. We're obviously from the description there, one teacher is doing the active teaching, while one is doing more observation of students. The next one teaches, one drifts. That's pretty self-explanatory as well. Station teaching, that's what you might have referred to as, what am I trying to say? Centers, stations that many of our lower grade levels use. We've gotten better at working that up to a more age-appropriate teaching and getting away from just a whole lot of lecture kind of delivery at our higher grades as well. Parallel teaching, two teachers working at once, alternative teaching, back and forth, and that differs a little bit from team teaching. So read about those in your book as well, so you can delineate the differences. We also want to have, beyond just the collaboration between teachers in the classroom and among the home and the school, we want to have collaboration amongst our administrators, with our paraprofessionals, and with those related service personnel who may be coming in and out of our classrooms to take kids out for therapies, paraprofessionals who are escorting our kids with disabilities from class to class, who maybe are going in and sitting with a child in a special classroom setting, or maybe a child who's limited to the amount of time they can spend in a general ed setting. Maybe they go and accompany them to that class and assist them with the work there. So we want to make sure that those people are part of that collaborative process and part of the overall input in decision making as well. We also have collaboration between the school and the greater community at large. I've talked in a previous session about early childhood intervention. That's the federal service that we have for children birth to 3. And when those children make the transition from that program into the school setting at the age of 3, we have to have a collaboration between the two entities. They move from one federal program into another federal program under IDEA in the school setting. And so we've got to have a seamless communication between the two organizations so that children never miss a day of receiving service for the birth to 3 program when they move into the school setting for the 3-year-olds up through 21. The same happens on the other end of the spectrum. When students turn 18, depending upon their level of need, some students need services beyond that in a very hands-on kind of way. Other students just need perhaps some counseling or some job training, or maybe just knowing what to do when they get to a post-secondary education kinds of settings, maybe a junior college or even a 4-year university. And so we make that transition on the other end as well. And we want to be in collaboration with adult services at the secondary level. So that takes us back to John. If we reflect again on John at the beginning of our chapter, what have we learned about collaboration in this chapter that we can apply to that particular profile of John? What could we tell our teachers, our paraprofessionals, our principal, our parents, our service providers that would help them from what we've gleaned in this chapter to better serve John and to make the pathway to his education smoother and more collaborative all the way along? That's what we get from chapter 3. So I'm going to close this session out, and chapters 1, 2, and 3 are on test 1, which is coming up. Thanks for your attention. See you soon.